thank you to everybody who showed up. I think there was a little bit of confusion as to which room I was going to be in. So I think we're recording this. So hopefully if they miss, they'll still be able to see it. So thank you all for coming. Brief introduction. Obviously, my name is Lance Peterman. Who I am by day, I lead the Identity and Access Management program at Equitable. By night, I am an adjunct professor and superhero at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Typically, I teach 2 classes a semester. Software architecture and design I've been teaching for about 8 years. I am also an emeritus member of the board of directors at ID Pro. Go ID Pro. I am also, because apparently I have a lot of spare time, I'm also a precinct judge at the Charlotte Board of Elections. So basically, I help execute at one precinct our voting process. You can find me at Lance Peterman, both on Twitter and LinkedIn. I will share a copy of these slides. I'm not sure if they made it into the app or not, but I will share it on both mediums at some point after the conference. So, for those of you who saw my talk last year, you don't need this recap, but since we're in the streaming age, previously on Moneyball, I talked about the concept of, I am a huge baseball fan, and I'm also a big fan of the movie/book Moneyball, because it deals with a problem that we have as well in the identity and cybersecurity space, and that is, how do we find and afford talent on a regular basis? And this gentleman tackled that challenge, not Brad Pitt actually, it was Billy Beane, but he tackled that by looking at some of the common factors of what defines a contributing player to a team. And his analysis, he basically said, does this person get on base? And if he does, then I can generate runs, which should translate into wins. So how do we translate that into the identity space? Well, put simply, it's do they understand digital identity? And the vector in which I was attacking this from, which is near and dear to my heart, is how do we start to get digital identity curriculum into higher education? Because what I've noticed over time is it's really not there. It's mentioned in some courses in very fleeting manners, but it really doesn't get the dedicated focus that, obviously I'm preaching to the choir at this conference, it needs greater communication and application for these students so that really, whether they wind up in working in identity or not, they can understand identity concepts, which allows them to be more successful really in whatever profession they're in. So we had this talk last year, and I walked away feeling pretty good about myself. Y'all were super supportive, and I really felt like I was on a mission. I was going to storm the castle of academia, and I was going to help them understand why they were flawed in their ways. And of course, I couldn't resist including A Princess Bride's Side, have fun storming the castle. Kind of ran into some obstacles along the way. But in discussing that, we'll go through what happened last fall. I just realized it's fall 2023. That hasn't happened yet. So we're in a time machine. We're going to talk about what happened there, some of the logistics of the class and some minor lessons learned there. Then we'll look at lessons learned at the micro level, what happened at the college, where I think we can take that further. Also learn lessons from the bigger picture. How do we turn this into something beyond just simply my college? And then finally, where do we go from here? But at the end, I have a grand challenge for y'all, and hopefully for people outside this room as well. So, fall 2022, I'm always living in the present, episode 1, basically where we landed was, during the summer, I was tasked with building the course. And to say that it was a challenge, just to set this up, as I mentioned, I work full-time for a living in addition to my job at UNC Charlotte. So building this is no small task. When I first started teaching, I had the benefit of another professor who had taught the course previously, not identity, but software architecture. So I could take what she had built and really just kind of make it my own over time. No such luxury here. This was building it from scratch. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir on this one, but one of the biggest assets that I had going in, and I knew I had it, was the body of knowledge. And it's been a huge resource in this class and a big help overall. But I was on a mission. I was on a mission to civilize, to teach people about identity. And, well, let's just say progress is slow. And if you're a newsroom fan, you kind of see why. One of them turned into a conversation with another professor where I was kind of suggesting, because he had another course that was focused on cloud security. I said, hey, if I could take a look at your curriculum, there might be a way for us to have some synergy between what I'm teaching in the identity class and what you're doing from cloud security. Kind of fits, right? He said, well, why are you teaching digital identity? We do that already. To which I responded, do we though? Because the narrator would say, we do not. His point was there was a class that I actually took even while I was doing my master's that was focused on access control. So yes, for one semester, there was about half of the focus on doing access control. I think it would be easy to say to this audience, that was not identity management. And that's really where the vision came from. So we started in, and we're now going to learn about, so how'd it go? So the class basically was 24 students, mostly freshmen and sophomores. The class was a little tough to build. I learned that while I'm pretty adept at teaching and I'm pretty adept at identity, I think, I'm not very good at marketing. So getting the word out was a little bit of a challenge, and part of the challenge with getting freshmen and sophomores in there, very little programming experience at that point. Not that that's essential for teaching identity concepts, but even their concept of looking at a systems view wasn't there. So there was a lot of foundation that had to be poured as part of that, and that's okay. I will say a lot of track was laid while the train was rolling. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that analogy. Basically, I built it as I went. I got about 3 to 4 weeks done prior to the semester beginning. I knew what the roadmap was, but a lot of the track wasn't laid. And so that was okay, but it was definitely made it more of a challenge. Grade structure, just in case you're interested, really wanted to focus on activities and applications for this. But of course, I had to test whether you're actually getting this, and so there were quizzes and exams associated with that. Overall, in terms of student feedback, they loved the guest speakers. I have to admit, I pulled my biggest trump cards, and I had Ian for 1 week, and I had Sarah for another week, and they absolutely loved them. I know those cards aren't available to me, but don't think I'm not going to be asking some of y'all in the future. On the evaluations, so at the end of the semester, all the students give web evaluations. They really enjoyed the class. One of the things they did ask for, though, was more activities to apply those concepts, which I think was a fair critique. My favorite comment, of course, was, this class was great. I think in the modern era, everyone should take this course or one similar. Clearly, we are of like minds in that regard, right? So it went pretty well. Now, one of the challenges that they ran into, though, was I felt like I was pointing a fire hose at them. So they felt very much like Neo sitting in the chair getting downloads. And so they walked away 1 week saying, I know identifiers, to which I said, show me. And that was where the quizzes came from. They helped a little bit, but there were some challenges. The first one was, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And even though I would assign these body of knowledge articles or other articles, students don't like to read these days. And so I have some solutions for that, but that is definitely a challenge because, as y'all are well aware, standards aren't brief. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not having them consume the 502 specification in the class. But there is some reading that definitely has to take place in order for them to apply those concepts. And so it can be a little bit of terminology overload at times. Y'all are well aware of this. Sometimes we can't even agree on what the terms stand for, much less deal with the complexity of the number of terms that they have to learn. And as I mentioned, some of the application of those concepts was a little challenging at times because they weren't necessarily grasping the terminology to begin with. Some of the lessons that I learned in building the course, the biggest one was building the activities was much harder than building the lectures. And some of that makes sense. It's a technical challenge, right? Body of knowledge is an absolute treasure. But again, the horse-water analogy applies here. What I learned out of that was every week is going to have a quiz to make sure that they've read the materials going in. That's the best I can do with that. I did accidentally leave out a session on citizen identity issues, and I definitely want to add that back in. There's a host of other things that I want to add contextually. And I kind of knew this going in, but this class can't be a bridge to getting the ID Pro certification. There's just too much for them to learn. I have some ideas on how they might be able to achieve that, though. Some other lessons learned. One of the things I attempted to do at the beginning of the class, which was kind of a for the students, was I started them off with systems thinking. I thought, oh, this will be great. They'll understand that concept, and then we can build on that. They had a really hard time with systems thinking. So I have to figure out, I still want to go that route, but I have to figure out a better way to approach it so that it's more accessible. Ideally, an intro to cybersecurity course should be a prerequisite for this class. And I'm trying to do that, but that's a kind of a mixed bag. I do need a stronger tie to the learning objectives of the class. I felt I was falling on that a little bit as we went along. And ideally, keep the class small if you can, which right now, current enrollment's at 11 students. If that stayed true, that would be awesome. Some of the teaching lessons that came out of this, week to week is okay, you know, talking about that laying the track analogy. You don't have to have it figured out all in week one, but definitely getting as much track down before the semester begins helps. Asking for feedback was huge because I knew this was a new course and I had some latitude because this was a special topics course. I regularly engage them for feedback. Hey, what's working, what's not? If we go a different path with this, what do you think about this? And I always tried to tie it to why. One of the things that I think the students do find accessible is if you can explain to them in reasonable terms why we're learning a particular topic or why identity even matters, they're more invested in the outcome. And then the final bit is just a note with psychological safety. What I was regularly doing with them was just sharing that a lot of this stuff is hard and it's a little overwhelming at times. So don't feel like you can't ask questions. Having the smaller class also contributes to that. So that was the lessons learned from teaching. What's the bigger picture look like? Well, the good news is the class is currently in process for formal adoption, which means it will actually stay in part of the course catalog. Initially, we're not forcing it as a requirement. My end game is I want it to absolutely be part of the cybersecurity degree that we issue. And I don't know if I'll win this battle, but I want to make it part of any comp sci degree, but that may be. So an analogy to that argument was I was talking to my department chair and I said, you know, the more that I teach my intro to cybersecurity class, I really think every major should have this as a requirement. And he looked at me and said, how many instructors do you have to teach that class? Because North Carolina at Charlotte is the largest degree granting program in the state of North Carolina for computer science. So it's a great problem, but it is definitely a problem. I need to work out the licensing when it comes to the body of knowledge. I am anticipating some resistance, but I feel like the outlook is good. The overall department supports what I'm trying to do. And an unexpected ally arrived. That class that I told you that I took during my master's hadn't been taught for the last 4 years. They actually taught it for the first time last semester, and they're going to continue to do that. So what it provides is a nice pairing of, if we can give them the fundamentals of identity management, then they can step into the access control with an even better foundation going in. So let's talk about beyond my school. Ultimately, as I mentioned last time, once adopted, once the course is in the books and we've kind of planted our flag, all the course materials will move to GitHub or a similar type repository. The goal of this ultimately is going to be, what I want to build is kind of a buffet of modules. And that's where I'm definitely going to need help because I can't build this on my own. And honestly, while I consider myself an expert in certain areas, there's a lot of areas that I'm not. And you know, Dean kind of reminded me in the previous talk that certain modules, I definitely need help, and hopefully people will be able to come up. The other piece that I'm kind of wondering is, like I mentioned, do we need to have a prerequisite for this course to make it successful? I think the answer is going to be yes to that, which unfortunately is a little bit of a barrier. So where do we go from here? The first one, and this was kind of a late lesson that I learned, but I think ultimately it's going to need to happen, especially if we want to get adoption at the community college level. I think the curriculum needs to be accessible by non-experts. In other words, other professionals who maybe aren't steeped in identity concepts. That violates my earliest rule about this, like they need to know identity. But I think if we make the curriculum accessible to them, they can learn it enough so that they can teach it. Ideally, however, it'd be awesome if we had identity professionals teaching this. I also clearly need to revisit the sales side of identity. The why pitch has to be made better so that my college and other colleges can understand that better. And also, the body of knowledge is a wonderful, wonderful thing, but even the chief editor of the body of knowledge will agree, we need better basic articles. What we have is good. We need broader depth so that it's not as intimidating to step into this field. One of my ideas in doing this, and part of this came from Kevin Streeter, so I want to give him proper credit, is the idea maybe we should have either developed by ID Pro or we leverage the existing Security Plus certification as a way of kind of setting the students up for this, because the newest version of the Security Plus exam has a rather nice level of identity content in it. So much so that I'm actually using the study guide for that exam in my Intro to Cybersecurity class. I also think we should absolutely strongly consider getting more conference scholarships for people to step into this world so that they can do that crash course in identity. I think we need to expand beyond ID Pro, get other organizations involved, other companies involved, and get as many new faces as we had in the Intro to Identity course. It was fantastic seeing how many new people were there this year, and I hope that continues. But I'm going to close on what I need from y'all, not necessarily you specifically, but I have a grand challenge. And of course, I wanted to put an earworm in your head. If you recognize this band, I want you to teach identity. Doesn't mean some of this idea might scare some of y'all. You don't have to. But if you have even an inkling of interest in this, I can tell you it's one of the most rewarding things. Sorry. It's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. That did not happen in rehearsal. So how can you contribute if teaching is or isn't an option for you? One thing I will tell you that isn't well known, local colleges love people from the field contributing to their classes. I can't stress this enough. And more importantly, the students love it even more. They consider those perspectives some of the most valuable experiences during their undergraduate and graduate educations. Now, your degree requirements will vary, so if you have an undergraduate degree, that's one step. Some colleges may require a master's degree. I don't know. Obviously, it's going to vary by institution. What I can tell you is you will have help. That's the whole aim of this programming, getting that curriculum delivered to an open source capability. Everybody will have access to this, and we'll build a community around how to teach this. Online can be an option. I'm personally biased. I don't like teaching remotely. The pandemic was very difficult in that regard. But if that's all you're comfortable with, that's okay too. It's still a contribution. And if this is too much for you individually, if there's somebody locally that you can consider possibly teaching with it, including even an existing professor that might help share the workload, that is absolutely an option. There are a number of courses at UNC Charlotte that are team taught. If you're still a hard no on teaching, if you would like to help with the curriculum, would not say no to any help in that regard. Designing the labs would be a huge help. So key takeaways. This was incredibly hard for me, but it was so worth it. There's lots more to do to succeed locally, but I'm in it. We're never done selling identity as essential to digital life. Obviously, that's an idea that has been pervasive, not just through this conference, but through previous iterations as well. I will need some help with the open sourcing of curriculum, so those of you who are experts in GitHub, I would certainly welcome that. And consider teaching or helping to build those modules of activities. Just like with ID Pro, you can contribute in a number of different ways. And obviously, if you have any questions, feedback, or you want to volunteer, you're welcome to email me at idpro.org. You can reach out to me on Twitter or on LinkedIn. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I'm wondering what the size stats were for the company. How many hours a week, for example?
So this particular class that I thought is a good question. Esma was asking how many hours was the class. It was a 3-hour or 3-credit class, so it was 3 hours per week. And typically what I would tell the students is plan to have about 3 hours of work prior to class going in, and that's on an average. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Is this an online delivered course or in person?
It was in person, thankfully.
You didn't have to deal with the learning management system or anything?
Well, we leverage a learning management system. So at UNC Charlotte, we use Canvas. Honestly, it makes it easier for me because reusing it from semester to semester is really nice.
Well, my follow-up was learning that system part of the...
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, learning your learning management system, and obviously there's a number of different platforms out there, certainly could be a challenge. That's where team teaching with a professor who has experience with that might be a benefit. Anybody else? Yes?
What other university programs did you draw from into your field?
So what I did, I didn't draw from any existing ones, and when I was looking for kind of a survey to figure out what was out there, I just went to some average articles that were rating the cybersecurity programs in Variety, and just looking at what the requirements for those were. So it certainly was not what I would call rigorous academic study. Call it a casual sampling, if you will. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very much. In celebration of the last episode of Ted Lasso, I took this photo at the end of my very first half marathon, and I believe. Thank you.